Have you ever found yourself lying awake at night, wondering when love turned into distance? Maybe you remember a time when your children called often, asked for your advice, or simply wanted to sit beside you. And now, there's silence, a coldness that you can't quite name. If that feels familiar, you're not alone. I've spoken with so many parents in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who carry the same quiet ache, the feeling that the people they once held closest now speak with words that wound instead of heal. Let me say this gently, it isn't always your fault. You gave love. You showed up. You sacrificed more than most will ever know. But sometimes love changes shape, and when it turns into disrespect, it's not love anymore. The good news is you still have choices. You can protect your peace, honor, your worth, and walk away with dignity when words become weapons. Today we'll talk about 8 things no parent should ever have to hear from their children and how to respond with strength, not anger. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Your city, your country. I truly read every comment. And if you believe in gentle, honest conversations about aging love and self-respect, please subscribe so we can keep growing this community together. Now let's begin with the first red flag, the kind of words that can bruise the heart more than silence ever could. Red flag number 1, you were a bad parent. I once met Robert, a 71-year-old man from Oregon. He had spent his life working 2 jobs, raising 3 children, and doing his best to keep a roof over their heads. One afternoon, while visiting his eldest son, a small argument turned heavy. His son looked at him and said, "You were a bad parent." Robert told me those words felt like a stone dropped in his chest. He didn't shout. He just nodded, went home, and sat in silence for hours wondering if all those years of effort had meant nothing. If you've ever heard something like that, please remember, it's not about truth. It's about control. Psychologists call this emotional punishment when someone uses guilt or shame to rewrite the story of love. It's a way for the child to hold power, not to heal. But love was never meant to be a weapon. Science shows that memory changes with emotion. When we're angry or resentful, our minds highlight pain and minimize care. That means your adult child might genuinely feel like you failed them, even if the full picture says otherwise. It's not evidence of your failure, it's evidence of their hurt. And that difference matters. Here's the emotional truth: no parent is perfect. We all made mistakes. Maybe you worked too much. Maybe you said "I love you" less than you felt it. But the fact that you care about those memories already proves your heart was in the right place. A cruel statement like "you were a bad parent" erases decades of love, and that's never fair. You can acknowledge the pain without accepting the blame. Say softly, "I may not have done everything right, but I never stopped loving you." Then stop explaining. You don't owe endless defense for the past you lived with love. If this has happened to you, practice a boundary today. Step back from conversations that turn into blame. Write a letter you don't send. Release your truth on paper, not in argument. That's how you protect your dignity. Remember this, my friend. You raised your children with the knowledge and strength you had at the time. Love is never wasted, even when it's misunderstood. Your worth is not defined by their anger. It's defined by the years you showed up, day after day, in love. Now let's look at the second red flag, one that quietly breaks the heart of many parents when a child says you're a burden. Red flag number 2, you're a burden. I remember meeting Ellen, a 73-year-old mother from Michigan. She lived in a small apartment near her daughter's home, often helping with her grandchildren. One evening, after she forgot to pick up some groceries, her daughter sighed and said, "Mom, you're becoming such a burden." Ellen told me she smiled on the outside, but something inside her quietly broke. She went home, folded the children's laundry, and cried into the soft cotton of their shirts, the same shirts she had washed 100 times before. If you've ever been told those words, please know this: you are not a burden. What you carry is the weight of a lifetime, the wisdom, love, and resilience that built the very people who now stand before you. Science calls it caregiver fatigue, not parental failure. Sometimes adult children under stress project their exhaustion onto the safest person they know, you. It doesn't make it right, but it helps us understand. Researchers at Stanford found that when people feel overwhelmed, their empathy circuits temporarily shut down. They stop seeing others as individuals and start seeing them as demands. So when your child calls you a burden, it often reflects their fatigue, not your worth. But repeated words like that can quietly eat away at your spirit, teaching you to shrink to apologize for existing. And that is not the life you deserve. Let's reframe this together. You are not too much. You are the reason they learned compassion. You are not in the way. You are the path they once walked to safety. And your presence, your stories, your laughter, your silence still matters deeply. So what can you do when those words appear? First, breathe. Resist the instinct to argue. Instead, respond calmly. I never wanted to be a burden, only a blessing. Maybe we both need rest. Then give space not as punishment, but as a boundary. It invites reflection instead of more hurt. In your private moments, care for yourself the way you once cared for everyone else. Walk in the sunlight. Call a friend who listens without judgment. Write down 3 things you gave your family that no one can take away: patience, protection, presence. Ellen later told me that after setting her boundaries, her daughter began to notice. Respect returned, and so did warmth. Because when love is healthy, it doesn't demand silence. It makes room for peace. Now let's look at the third red flag, one that feels quieter but just as painful: when your child says, I'm too busy for you. Red flag number 3, I'm too busy for you. When I met Harold, a 76-year-old retired carpenter from Vermont, he showed me a small notebook he kept beside his phone. Inside were dates every call he had made to his son over the past year. There were check marks beside a few months, but most of the pages were blank. He said quietly, he always tells me he's too busy, but he still finds time to post pictures from trips to Italy. The way Harold looked at that empty notebook said everything. If you've ever heard I'm too busy for you, you know it's not just about time, it's about value. Modern life runs fast. Careers, children, endless screens. But here's what science reminds us: the human brain is wired for connection. Psychologists call it the attachment system, and it doesn't stop working just because we age. Whether we're 8 or 80, being ignored by someone we love activates the same part of the brain that processes physical pain. That's why silence hurts so deeply. It tells your nervous system that you no longer belong. But let's pause and reframe. Sometimes I'm busy isn't cruelty, it's emotional avoidance. Some adult children struggle with aging parents because it reminds them of their own fear of time. They run not from you, but from what you represent: vulnerability, mortality, reflection. Understanding that doesn't excuse it, but it can keep bitterness from taking root in your heart. When you face the silence, here's a gentle practice. Stop chasing. Send one short message that says, I'm thinking of you. I hope you're well. Then release the outcome. Let silence be their choice, not your burden. Use that space to nurture the connections that do respond: a neighbor, a friend, a community center, even this online family here. Connection doesn't have to come from blood, it comes from care. Harold eventually joined a local woodworking group. He told me when I stopped waiting by the phone, I started living again. And 2 months later, his son called, not out of guilt, but curiosity. Sometimes stepping back creates the room others need to step forward. Your worth is not measured by the attention you receive, but by the love you continue to give, even to yourself. Next, we'll explore another painful phrase, one that confuses love with obligation: you owe me. Red flag number 4, you owe me. I once sat with Martha, a 78-year-old widow from Colorado. She had worked as a nurse for 40 years, raised 2 children on her own, and helped both of them through college. One afternoon, her son called and said, Mom, you owe me for everything you didn't do when I was younger. She told me she felt a chill move through her chest, not anger, but disbelief. She had already given her youth, her health, her sleep. What more could she possibly owe? If you've ever heard something like that, please pause and take a breath. This is not love speaking, it's entitlement. It happens when gratitude is replaced by expectation. Psychologists describe this as emotional debt syndrome, the belief that love, care, and sacrifice can be converted into currency. But parenting was never a financial contract. It was an act of faith. Science helps us understand why this happens. In a culture that glorifies independence, many adult children subconsciously resist feeling indebted. So instead of saying thank you, They rewrite history, turning your giving into their grievance. It's a defense mechanism, not truth. But when repeated, it becomes emotional exploitation, making you feel guilty for simply existing. Here's the emotional reframe. You brought your children into the world out of love, not obligation. You gave them food, safety, and the foundation of their future. That was your gift freely given. And a gift doesn't create debt, it creates connection. If someone forgets that you are not responsible for their amnesia. So what can you do when faced with "you owe me"? Stay calm. Say, "I did what I could with the heart I had. I don't owe, but I still care." Then end the conversation with grace. Don't let guilt rewrite your story. Instead, turn that energy toward the life you're still building. Martha eventually started volunteering at a hospice center. She said, "For the first time in years, I'm giving without being measured." That's the heart of healing, to return to generosity without fear of being used. Your love has already been paid forward through every lesson, every meal, every moment of comfort you once gave. You owe no one an apology for doing your best. What you owe yourself now is peace. Next, let's look at the fifth red flag, the quiet wound that comes from being dismissed when someone says, "You're too old to understand." Red flag number 5, you're too old to understand. I remember visiting Helen, a 79-year-old retired teacher from Maine. She had taught literature for almost 4 decades, shaping young minds, encouraging imagination. Yet one afternoon, while discussing a family decision about her care, her son interrupted and said, "Mom, you're too old to understand." She told me she smiled politely, but inside her heart folded in on itself. All those years of teaching, advising, guiding, suddenly erased with one careless sentence. If you've ever been brushed aside like that, let's pause and name the truth: your wisdom has not expired. Research in neuroscience shows that while certain forms of quick recall may slow with age, the brain's ability to integrate experience, what scientists call crystallized intelligence, actually grows. That means older adults often see patterns and consequences that younger minds overlook. Your slower pace is not confusion, it's depth. It's perspective earned through decades of living. When someone says you're too old to understand, what they often mean is, "Your insight makes me uncomfortable." It's easier for them to dismiss than to listen. But understanding isn't about age, it's about empathy. And empathy, my friend, only deepens with time. Let's reframe this together. You don't need to prove your relevance by keeping up with every new app or trend. Your value lies in something rare, the kind of wisdom that only comes from survival. You've lived through loss, change, uncertainty, and still kept faith. That's understanding in its purest form. Here's a small practice for moments when you feel dismissed. Take a breath and respond gently. "I may be older, but I've seen enough to understand more than you think." Then let silence do the work. You don't have to argue to reclaim your dignity. Your calm is its own authority. Helen began journaling again after that day. She told me writing reminded me that my mind still blooms. She even started a small book club at her community center, mentoring others her age to share their stories. Because age does not make us less, it makes us layered. And those layers are where the deepest wisdom lives. Next, we'll look at another subtle wound the moment your feelings are turned against you. When someone says, "Why do you always make everything about you?" Red flag number 6. Why do you always make everything about you? I once met Carol, a 75-year-old grandmother from Wisconsin. She told me about the time she shared with her son how lonely she felt after his visits became rare. Instead of listening, he sighed and said, "Mom, why do you always make everything about you?" Carol smiled faintly, changed the subject, and spent the evening pretending she wasn't hurt. But later she sat by her kitchen window, the one that overlooked her garden, and whispered to herself, "Was I wrong for wanting to be heard?" If that question has ever crossed your heart, let me assure you, no, you weren't wrong. Psychologists call this pattern emotional deflection. When someone feels uncomfortable facing their own behavior, they flip the focus to make you feel guilty for speaking up. It's not a conversation, it's a defense. And the more it happens, the quieter you become, until silence becomes the new language of the relationship. But silence is where love slowly fades. Here's the science behind it. Our brains are wired to seek connection through validation. When someone minimizes your feelings, Your nervous system experiences it as rejection. The same part of the brain that processes physical pain lights up. That's why even small dismissive comments can leave such deep emotional bruises. Let's reframe this together. Your feelings are not a problem to fix, they're a truth to honor. Expressing sadness, disappointment, or longing doesn't make you selfish, it makes you human. You've spent decades caring for others. Wanting care in return is not weakness, it's reciprocity. Here's a small practice to restore your voice. The next time you're interrupted or dismissed, take a gentle pause and say, "I'm not blaming you, I'm just sharing how I feel." Then stop. Let your words rest in the air. You don't need to argue for your right to be heard. Your calm honesty teaches others how to treat you. Carol began doing this. She told me that at first her son grew quiet, not defensive, just thoughtful. Over time, he started listening. And when he did, she said it felt like breathing again. Your emotions are not noise. They are the language of love, asking to be respected. When you honor your own feelings, you remind others to do the same. Now let's move to the seventh red flag one that turns love into a transaction when a child says, "You're lucky I still talk to you." Red flag number 7, you're lucky I still talk to you. I once met Frank, a 78-year-old father from Ohio. He told me that every few months his daughter would call, usually after weeks of silence. Each time the conversation began kindly, but ended the same way. "You're lucky I still talk to you." Frank said those words cut deeper than anger. They turned love into a favor, not a bond. He would hang up, stare at the empty chair across from him, and whisper, "Lucky I changed her diapers. I paid her tuition. I held her through every heartbreak." How did love become charity? If you've ever been told that, you already know it's not a conversation, it's control. It's a statement that says you must earn my presence. Psychologists call this conditional affection, when love becomes a reward rather than a connection. And when relationships turn transactional, they stop being safe. Science gives us a clue why this happens. In strained family ties, one person often uses withdrawal of communication as a tool of dominance. Studies show that silence activates anxiety pathways in the listener's brain, causing them to seek reconciliation even when they're not at fault. It's emotional manipulation dressed as distance. But here's the reframe. Love doesn't keep score. It doesn't hold you hostage for affection. And you, my friend, are not lucky to receive crumbs of attention. They are lucky to still have a parent who wants to connect. There are millions who would give anything for one more phone call with a mother or father now gone. You are not disposable. Here's a small practice for reclaiming your peace. The next time someone uses love as leverage, answer calmly, "I'm always grateful to hear your voice. But I hope one day we talk because we want to, not because one of us feels lucky." Then step back. Let quiet dignity replace desperate chasing. You don't have to beg for what should be freely given. Frank did this. He stopped pleading for calls. 2 months later, his daughter reached out differently. Her tone was softer, her words slower. Sometimes love needs the silence of boundaries to remember what it truly is. You are worthy of affection without conditions, conversation without fear, and connection without debt. Now let's turn to the final red flag, the one that breaks the deepest part of the heart, when your child says, "I don't need you anymore," or even worse, "I wish you weren't my parent." Or it's your red flag, number 8, "I don't need you anymore. I wish you weren't my parent." I once met George, an 80-year-old widower from Texas. He had a quiet grace, the kind that comes from decades of working, loving, and providing. But when I asked about his family, his eyes filled with tears. He told me his son had said, "Dad, I don't need you anymore. You had your time." A few months later, during another argument, came the words no parent should ever hear: "I wish you weren't my father." George said it felt as if the air left the room. After everything he whispered, how could love vanish like that? If you've ever heard those words, I want to tell you something clearly: you did not fail. When adult children lash out this way, it often comes from unhealed pain or misplaced anger. Psychologists call it role reversal grief, when grown children unconsciously resent seeing their parents age because it forces them to face their own fears of loss and mortality. So they create distance. sometimes with silence, sometimes with cruelty. But their reaction says more about their fear than your worth. Here's the emotional reframe. You may not be needed in the same ways you once were, but that doesn't mean you've lost value. Your wisdom, your stories, your love, they still echo in the people you raised, whether they acknowledge it or not. Being told I don't need you doesn't erase the decades of times you were their world. It only reveals how far they've drifted from gratitude. So what can you do when words cut this deep? First, protect your peace. Walk away not out of anger, but out of love for yourself. Say softly, I hope one day you remember how loved you've always been. Then close the door gently. You can still pray for them, still wish them well from a distance that doesn't destroy your spirit. George began doing just that. He joined a local veterans group, started gardening again, and said I stopped waiting for his apology. That's when I finally felt free. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes it simply means choosing peace over pain. Remember this, my friend. You are not here to be tolerated. You are here to be treasured. Love may falter, but dignity is forever yours. Now that we've walked through these 8 red flags, let's bring everything together, the lessons, the hope, and the healing in our final reflection. As we come to the end of this conversation, I want you to take a slow, deep breath. You've walked through 8 painful truths, words no parent should ever have to hear. And yet here you are listening, reflecting, choosing peace instead of bitterness. That alone is strength. Maybe you recognize 1 or 2 of these red flags in your own life. Maybe you've lived through all of them. But please remember this, your story is not over, and your love was never wasted. Every meal cooked every night, stayed awake, every silent prayer, they still matter. Even if gratitude never comes back the way you hoped, your love has already shaped the world. Science tells us that the human heart, even in old age, can rewire itself through compassion and gratitude. That means it's never too late to heal, to forgive, to feel light again. You can love your children and still protect your boundaries. You can hope for reconciliation and still choose peace today. So if any part of this message touched your heart, share your story in the comments below. Someone out there needs to hear that they are not alone, that it's okay to step back, to rest, to begin again. And if you believe, as I do, that aging should be a chapter of dignity, connection, and self-respect, please subscribe and stay with our community here. This is Dr. Michael Carter reminding you, you are not here to be tolerated. You are here to be treasured. Your peace is sacred. Guard it gently, live it fully, and let it guide you home.